Normally, I'm not the biggest fan of episodes that revolve around a character having their body stolen, but I will have to make an exception for this episode of Konosuba. The reason why is because Darkness's body was the one that was stolen, and as we know, Darkness is a huge masochist, and because of that, it really makes for some interesting dialogue between the characters, and also the person that stole her body having conflict with Darkness, and then also Darkness kind of siding with the person that stole her body for a couple of moments. It makes for a very enjoyable watch. Now, before I get into what this episode is about, to the plot, to, the characters, the comedy, all that, I just want to say, if all of you didn't notice, the art style definitely shifted in this episode. I talked about it in my last episode review of Konosuba, and as I said, the reason why the art style seems so off last week was because of the director watching over the episode, and he put his own style on it. And if you look at this episode, the art style completely different. It went back to what we saw in the previous episodes before last week's episode, and it kind of looks like the standard Konosuba from what we see throughout this episode. We don't see big-ass Opie that literally look bigger than a head, and I'm like, oh my god, like, why are they so big? The art style seems to be back to normal, so anyone that was kind of bothered by last week's, art style, everything's back to normal how it was with, the previous episodes with this episode. Now, with that being said, though, let us talk about the plot of the episode. As I already briefly said, the episode is about Darkness getting her body stolen, but there is some things that happen before that, and as always, our group, Cosma and his group, is making problems throughout the entirety of the world. And as we know, a couple episodes ago, Aqua and Cosma went into a dungeon to get rid of all these problems. They went in to get treasure, all sorts of stuff. They eventually found the Lich. They found his tragic story. They purified him, and Aqua put down like a purification circle, which caused it to where everybody would disappear. All these creatures inside the dungeon would not want to come there at all. And so, in this way, Aqua caused the problem of this episode. This demon commander that works underneath the Demon King went to this dungeon, and he's like, holy crap, like, there's no one here. He's taking it over. He was sending out troops, which was causing harm to everyone around the area. So, Aqua caused the problem in this episode. So, typical Konosuba fashion, it's thanks to Aqua or some of our characters that caused the problems to happen later on down the road. And you just gotta love the way the comedy is used in this episode, especially with how it parodies, RPG elements. I mean, that entire scene with Darkness charging in and all that, and she was just tanking the explosions. I was just thinking about RPGs in general. And speaking of RPGs, I mean, if you don't know, tanks are supposed to take damage. They're supposed to have all the damage coming in and shit. They're supposed to constantly take all these blows while the healer or whatever is constantly, reviving or healing them, keeping them, in the green. And in this case, it makes sense with, Darkness. She's a masochist and she loves taking damage. And I just love how Darkness can just charge in against these, little, like, small miniature dwarfs that have the mask like Vanir, and they explode when they touch her, and she is, completely fine. Like, you don't see how it's even damaging her at all. She just continues to truck on, and everything's completely fine. And the reason why is because, number one, she's a tank, and number two, she's Darkness, because she's a masochist. And I just love how this role as a tank really plays a, a huge part of her character, and how it just fits the theme of Konosuba. I mean, I know not many might care about that, little elements of RPGs and stuff, but just seeing, like, this little element in this episode with Darkness tanking these explosions and shit, I'm just thinking of, like, RPGs, MMORPGs, where you have the tank going in, taking all this fucking extreme damage, and then you have the healer just, making sure they're fine. But in this case, Darkness didn't even need a heal because, she could take it all, and also she enjoys, pain and all that type of stuff. So, yeah, very funny. Anyways, one of the big things about this episode is introducing a character, Vanir. Hopefully I'm saying his name right. He works underneath the Demon King, and we've already seen a couple of the commanders underneath the Demon King. And if things continue like this, Cosma and his party are probably going to wipe out the Demon King's army before everything is said and done, and not really even having to search out and find the Demon King. They're probably just going to wipe out his commanders, because every time we see, like, every season of Konosuba, last season, now this season, one demon commander is getting completely wrecked. So the Vanir gets wrecked in this episode, but it's funny how he goes down, and how he goes down was something that truly entertained me, and that was when Darkness got her body stolen. And as I already said, I'm not the biggest fan of episodes that really focus around that. It feels like a cheap way to add conflict to individual episodes, but in this case, it didn't really add conflict, it added comedy, and it was just very funny to see these individual scenes of how a character like Darkness is actually satisfied that her body got stolen, because when you normally see a scene like this, obviously it's very tragic. You have the characters feeling upset like, oh shit, we can't harm this person because, you know, we care about them, and if we do any harm to them, we're actually hurting them, and so we can't kill this person, we can't forcibly remove this person, or obviously the person we care about will get harmed or die. And in this case, it won't work towards Darkness, because Darkness, she relishes in the pain. She loves that shit. She absolutely loves that. So when you see how her body's taken over, and the dude's like, oh, you know she's in a lot of pain right now, right? Like, she's under immense pain. And he's like, wait a minute, do I feel happiness? I was like, what the fuck? Like, Darkness is just happy that she's feeling pain, that her mind is gonna get shattered. I'm like, she's getting mind fucked right now, and she's just completely fine with it. She's just having a time of her life. And then the little arguments between Darkness and Vanir and how they were completing each other's sentences, that was great too. Just seeing how, like, this man was talking and you see, you know, saying some evil shit, and then all of a sudden Darkness would, like, finish his sentence. I'm like, oh my god. Like, that's just so good. And then towards the end of it, when, you know, the final stages of the episode, it seemed like Darkness, she was working with Vanir, and Vanir and Darkness, they were both thinking and planning shit together. Even though Vanir was trying to steal her body, Darkness, like, helping him out, like, oh, Cosmo's gonna be using the still skill to, you know, try to, you know, take the mask off. That was just so funny. I don't know if I'm the only one that really enjoyed those scenes in this episode, but Darkness having a dispute with Vanir in her body, and then they were working together, I just couldn't help it. And then also when he's like, wait, do I feel happiness? Okay, with that being said though, I feel like this episode had a lot of good, you know, running gags that were once again brought up in this episode. One of them, explosion! You know, Megumine's, you know, explosion, you know, entire phrase she always says. I love that shit. You cannot have a Konosuba episode without explosion. And then another one, which is one of my personal favorites besides explosion, is the Cosmo one, where Cosmo, you know, is asking, he's like, Sato-san, and he's like, Sato des? Yeah, I fucking love that shit. I love that shit so much. And then another one, I like, you know, how Megumine, she's like, Cosmo, and, you know, you have it where you ask her, answers back, just those little scenes, those little running gags, I truly appreciate, and I love those in the first season, and I'm glad they popped up once again in the second season of Konosuba. So yeah, overall, the episode was very fun to watch, and I think everybody can agree with me and say that a Darkness episode is pretty fun, but on top of that, though, just seeing some gags that we've already seen before, kind of being constantly used, like, you know, running gags, like stuff like explosion, or, you know, I'm Cosmo and all that, that's always enjoyable to actually see in a new episode. So let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. How do you feel about this week's episode of Konosuba? Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Please let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. And I love you all so much. Please be safe. Chibi out.